An Israeli general makes interesting revelations about an American space program on Mars. Coming up next on Encounters USA. Hello everybody and welcome to Encounters USA with author Matthew Hines. If you're looking for alien incidents, Bigfoot brouhahas, or dogman dealings, we have the podcast interviews, field research, and field interviews you're gonna love. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and check us out on Patreon. Now, on with the show. Hello everybody and happy holidays. Welcome back to Encounters USA. If you're new to the show, we follow aliens, Bigfoot, and Dogman. And today, we really have a very big alien story with another interesting alien revelation coming out not from the United States, which might even vouch for its credibility, but coming from an ex-Israeli general and actually the Israeli space spy who actually was in charge of sending missiles and satellites into space. So it's a very interesting revelation that he made, and without too much delay, let's just get into what he came out and said, and let's go right into the story that came out on NBC News here. Right now, let's take a look. Former Israeli space security chief says extraterrestrials exist and Trump knows all about it. A galactic federation has been waiting for humans to reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are, Haim Eshed said. A former Israeli space security chief has sent eyebrows shooting heavenward by saying that Earthlings have been in contact with extraterrestrials from a galactic federation. The unidentified flying objects have asked not to publish that they are here. Humanity is not ready, Haim Eshed, former head of Israel's Defense Ministry's Space Directorate, told Israel's Yediot Aharonot newspaper. The interview in Hebrew ran on Friday and gained traction after parts were published in English by the Jerusalem Post on Tuesday. A respected professor and retired general, Eshed said the aliens were equally curious about humanity and were seeking to understand the fabric of the universe. Eshed said cooperation agreements had been signed between species, including an underground base in the depths of Mars where there are American astronauts and alien representatives. There is an agreement between the U.S. government and the aliens. They signed a contract with us to do experiments here, he said. Eshed added that President Donald Trump was aware of the extraterrestrials' presence and existence and had been on the verge of revealing information but was asked not to in order to prevent mass hysteria. They have been waiting until today for humanity to develop and reach a stage where we will understand in general what space and spaceships are, Eshed said, referring to the Galactic Federation. The White House and Israeli officials did not immediately respond to an NBC's request for comment. Sue Gao, a spokesman for the Pentagon, declined to comment. A spokesman for NASA said one of the agency's key goals was the search for life in the universe, but that it had yet to find signs of extraterrestrial life. Although we have yet to find signs of extraterrestrial life, never a straight answer, is exploring the solar system and beyond to help us answer fundamental questions, including whether we are alone in the universe, the spokesman said in a statement. Eshed's ideas are spelled out in more detail in The Universe Beyond the Horizon, Conversations with Professor Chaim Eshed by Hager Yanai, published in November. Eshed, who oversaw the launch of numerous Israeli satellites into space, said he was only speaking out now because attitudes were changing and people are more receptive. If I had come up with what I'm saying today 5 years ago, I would have been hospitalized, he told Yediot. Today they're already talking differently. I have nothing to lose. I've received my degrees and awards. I'm respected in universities abroad. In May, Trump said, space is going to be the future, both in terms of defense and offense. We're now the leader on space, as he was presented with the official flag of a newly created military branch, Space Force. Its focus, along with the Space Command, is on space as a military domain for the U.S., preserving satellites and communications, and a focus on geopolitics in new terrain. Eshed's comments immediately spawned jokes and theories online. At least half a dozen accounts have been created on Twitter claiming to be representatives from the Galactic Federation. Other users have asked for preferential treatment and meetings with the otherworldly group. Nick Pope, who used to investigate UFOs for the British Ministry of Defense, described Eshed's remarks as extraordinary. Either this is some sort of practical joke or publicity stunt to help sell his book, perhaps with something having been lost in translation, or someone in the know is breaking ranks, he said. Pope said the UFO and conspiracy theory community was excited, but that questions remain, including whether or not Eshed was speaking from direct personal knowledge and experience or whether he's repeating something he's been told. There are still some missing pieces of the puzzle here. All right, so we've had a look at what this story says, and before we go any farther, of course we need to look at the story itself and find out or ask ourselves, as we always do on Encounters USA, number one, is this story even credible? And in order to do that, we need to look at who the story is about and what it's about. So the story is about this Israeli general, and he had the position of, as the story says, launching Israeli satellites, and, of course, they would be spy satellites into space. So this is not some guy off the street who's probably making up tales. So he's a professor. So, and as he says, I don't care. He says, I've got my accolades. I've done everything I need to do. I'm going to come out and say this. And why is he saying it? He says, well, of course, why he's saying it is a very big question. Motivations are always tantamount in anybody's I guess you'd say credibility when it comes to like a UFO story or UFO sighting. So in this case, the question is, what are his motivations to come out with a story? And obviously he feels like it's something that, needs to be said. Now in the story they say, according to Nick Pope, that, it could be a way for him to sell his book, or he could be actually legitimate, and he stepped out of line as far as, people who are involved with these kinds of things. So that's, what the story is basically about. That's who this guy is, and those are his motivations. But we need to look a little bit deeper into the story. And first of all, let's look at the author of the story, or the authors of the story, and do they really know what they're talking about? And at the first part of the story, there is a quote from the general where they, you imagine that somebody's Translating from Hebrew into English because it was first put out in Hebrew, and I don't know if the translation is correct, whatever. But they refer to the UFOs as actually that we're communicating with UFOs, and not people. So that's kind of a big mistake if you're a journalist, and so you have to wonder if they were just ignorant of what they were talking about, unconcerned about it, or if they were really just going verbatim off of what was translated in this paper. So, another question to be asked. When we look into these things, there's always more questions than there are answers. So, the next thing that we need to really be concerned with in the story is the fact that, as all these UFO stories, they're all about, it's like they have a formula or something. They go right to the nut case, thing, and they start talking about, oh, well, yeah, these nuts on Twitter are saying this. So always bring in the lunatic fringe, and that must be the formula. If you write a story about UFOs, you always have to end it with some kind of lunatic fringe reference, whatever, which they do. But to give them some kind of credit, they don't end it with the lunatic fringe. They actually begin it with the lunatic fringe, when we'll talk about that in a second, when we talk about NASA's comment. But to give them credit, they ended the story by talking to Nick Pope. Now, I don't know, and I'm not trying to name drop or interview drop here, but I interviewed Nick Pope over almost a year ago now. It was the last conference, and I talk about this on my website. I do a kind of a blog, and I put some of the stuff on the front page of my website for Encounters USA. But I interviewed Nick last year at the, I guess it wasn't last year yet, since it's almost the end of December of 2020. But I interviewed Nick at the last, conference that you could have for paranormal stuff, and that was out in Ocean Shores, Washington. And I like to have fun with people, and so I was kind of ribbing him, saying, "Well, what if you're part of the cover-up or whatever?" And so they did interview Nick, and he did make the final point that, well, yeah, he could be a guy that's stepping out of line, and he's legitimate. So there we have a look at the person who revealed the story seems legitimate. The people who wrote the story are trying to, make it funny or whatever by bringing in the lunatic fringe. And Nick Pope is bringing up the point that there could be other motivations, lost in translation stuff, or it could be somebody actually stepping out of line, and this is legitimate. So there are a couple of things that we need to cover before we continue on, and that is NASA. NASA came out and said that they have never found any evidence of extraterrestrial life, although they're looking for it. Now, I'm just going to say this for the people at NASA's, what they didn't say was that the Navy's already come out and said that we found extraterrestrial life. We want you to report it. They're not from here. They're from out in some other, galaxy, whatever. The Navy's already said that. But NASA said, well, we've never found it. Now, why is that? For NASA's credit, for NASA's benefit, is that the idea at NASA, and this is from one of these guys that they interviewed about, the UFO program, you come to NASA to do science or UFOs. You don't come to do both. So that's it. Their end of story. If you want to work at NASA, you don't talk about UFOs. Pretty much there. I guess it's a different agreement now in the Navy. All right, so there's the story. We've looked at it, and we have two paths that we can take now. The first path we can take is it is just a piece of garbage and treat it as such and leave it at that, right? Because nobody could be reached for comment at the Pentagon, and apparently they couldn't find this guy or whatever for comment. So maybe it's all about nothing. Or this guy who comes out and says, I don't care. I am a legitimate guy, and I'm telling you what I'm telling you is true, and this is the way it is. Well, that goes along with just a lot of other information that we've been getting, we in the UFO community, for a long time. And I'm not just talking about the UFO community. We're going to be talking in this podcast, we're bringing in the only people that we really have that we can rely on. That is the former military remote viewers who looked at Mars. And we're going to be going into depth talking about specifically Joe Macmoneagle's viewing of Mars. We're also going to talk about what Courtney Brown has to say about Mars. And we're also going to be talking about, and there's been other remote viewers that have done things on Mars. So what we're going to be talking about is not something new, and it's not something that hasn't been being talked about since the 1980s, since they started remote viewing this stuff. Now, you can say right now, oh, come on, this is just a bunch of poppycock and whatever you want. But I've been following this, and I'm just going to have to go back to this analogy of the elephant. And I don't know if you've heard this story, but I always like to use this, and you'll probably hear me use it again. But there's this story from India about these wise men that are blind, and they come up to an elephant, and they are not sure what this thing, looming mass, is in front of them. So they each say, well, I will take a part and describe it, and then together we'll find out and determine what it is. So as the story goes, and I'm paraphrasing horribly here, but one says, well, it's a tree or something, or it's a large vine, because he had the trunk. And then one said, no, it's a large tree. It's a very large tree. And that's because he had a leg. And then another one said, no, he's a serpent. It's a snake, very thin snake, because he had a tail. And another one said it's a tree. It's got a big leaf because he had the ear. And I think you get the point. These blind men had no reference to an elephant. They didn't know what they were, trying to determine what it was. So they just had to go with what they knew and then compare it. So just like everything else, whether you're into Dogman or Bigfoot or aliens, you have to take what people say, compile the information, and see if it makes sense. Because the thing is when things don't really compile or jibe, then yeah, okay, that's probably just making stuff up. But when people that have no connection to each other start saying the same thing, then that starts to be interesting. And sometimes it goes beyond coincidence. So that's what we're talking about here, and that's the only reason I'm doing this podcast. I've been interested in this stuff for so long. Unfortunately, the revelations about the UFOs by the Navy, that was during the middle of this, China virus thing. And so I was running for office. I was running for Congress in Washington State. So I was so caught up in everything else. I had no time for Encounters USA. Had no time for the biggest revelation in the history of the world. The Navy says there's UFOs and you can report them to us now. So nobody said anything. And I guess I'm going to have to jump back to the end of that story or not the end of the story, about why they said that they didn't want Donald Trump to tell anybody. And that was because it would cause mass panic. Are you kidding me? Look around you now. They have shut everybody down. They've told them they can't leave their houses. They told them they can't even talk to people anymore. and nobody said anything. And they're worried about mass panic from saying, "Oh, there's people coming from outer space." That's not gonna happen. People don't even care anymore. Most people, unfortunately, wouldn't have, or would have some kind of cartoonish concept of aliens and wouldn't be able to understand half of the implications of alien life anyway. So these arguments that it's going to cause mass hysteria and mass panic have obviously been proven beyond a doubt not true and unfounded. We've always been able to take that. I mean, we've been able to take the fact that God created the universe, a being that is much above us. So what else, what else is there? Anyway, I think what they're more concerned about is they're more concerned about people buying things. That's it. They just don't want people to stop buying things. Nothing more than that. They don't want to do anything or say anything to make you stop buying things. So if you want to really piss them off, stop buying things, and that'll shake them up. All right, so enough of my social commentary. Now, with the obviously understanding that we have two very credible sources now, the U.S. Navy and this guy in Israel, that have come out and said that there are these UFOs. We're going to start talking about the references that we have from the past. Joe Macmoneagle, Courtney Brown, and a few other people. But before we do, I want to stop for a minute and take a look at this brief message. Hey everybody, don't you hate commercials? I know I do, so I'm going to make this really quick. I write books. I'd like you to read my book, Deceptions of the Ages, for one reason and one reason only. You have to understand the reason for the cover-up behind the aliens, Bigfoot, and Dogman. It's that simple. Okay? Read it. Buy it. Available on Amazon, Kindle, iTunes, Kobo, Nook. All right, let's get back to the show. Well, that wasn't so hard, was it? All right then. So, now we're going to start talking about things outside of this article, things that might support what this article said and what this general had to say. So, the first thing we need to talk about is, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we're going to go back in time, and this is an actual event. It actually happened. The Russians sent a probe called Phobos, and I believe it was in 1980. They sent it to Mars, and they actually sent two probes. Phobos, I think it was Phobos 1, Phobos 2. And anyway, when they got to Mars, they were actually photographing one of the smaller moons of Mars, and I don't want to say the moon is Phobos, and I should probably look at this story a little bit closer because it's been a while since I've seen it or listened to it. But the gist of the story is that the probe that they sent to basically photograph, I guess it was Phobos, the moon Phobos, that orbits Mars. One of the satellites on the way supposedly switched off, so some glitch. The other one got to Phobos and it got knocked out by something. And right before it got knocked out, you can see some kind of very large, almost as big as the moon itself, cylinder object. And it seems to be in the proximity of this satellite or of this probe. So that thing got knocked out by something. Now, before these satellites or these probes took their pictures or they got knocked out, one of them was orbiting around Mars taking pictures. and it took a series of pictures that showed some object was hovering between the satellite or the probe and the light source, which was the sun. A huge object. Another thing that it found was that there was a lot of what looked to be city-like buildings, like a huge city, and it looked like there was some kind of difference, like there was heat coming out of this city. Now, all of this stuff I'll just reference right now to the TV show Phenomenon. And that's where this information came from. So if you want to reference that, the TV show Phenomenon, and check it out. So that's what happened with the Russians, and fairly well documented stuff. Nothing new here. So the next place we're going to go is, remember, we don't have anybody to tell us the truth. Never a Straight Answer or NASA is not going to tell us the truth. Fortunately, there are people that worked for the military as what we call remote viewers that have come out and are hopefully telling the truth. And hopefully, I'm going to get Ed Dames on here. I haven't had a chance to talk to him. This came out, and I've sent him an email, and I'm waiting for a reply right now. But I'd really like to get him on here because he is a contemporary and a colleague of Joe Macmoneagle, who we're going to be talking about now. And Joe is one of the preeminent remote viewers. And Joe, if you're out there and you want to come on this show and talk about any of this stuff, I would sure be glad to have you. Encounters USA #1, Encounters USA 1 at gmail.com. I would love to have you on the show to talk about this stuff, or by that stretch, I'll take anybody on the show who is a remote viewer and who has remote viewed around the solar system. Or the galaxy would be fine too, but I'm very interested in the solar system. We're going to be talking also about Courtney Brown and the other these other remote viewers. But first of all, I want to start with Joe Macmoneagle. Now, Joe Macmoneagle, I'm not going to go into his background, and I'm not going to go into remote viewing either. If you don't know what it is, Google it, look at a few videos on it. It's basically, I'm not going to say psychic, except for the fact that the only way you can relate to it is by saying psychic. But these people use what is really what appears to be an innate human quality to remote view past, present, or other things. Never done it myself, but I see a lot of very legitimate people doing it, and I don't believe they're all involved in the same hoax. So that's why we're talking about Joe Macmoneagle. So if you haven't seen Joe Macmoneagle's video, I encourage you to watch it. I'm going to leave links to all this stuff in the description, but I encourage you to look at Joe Macmoneagle's video because, number one, it's very emotional as to what he's looking at. And number two, the information that he is presenting is just phenomenal. Now, again, it's not just Joe Macmoneagle's information that we're going to be looking at. There's other people that we're going to also be talking, their information at least, that we're going to be talking about. And we're also going to be talking about developments on Earth that may or may not confirm this stuff. So it's all very, very interesting. So, all right, let's go to Joe Macmoneagle. Now, Joe Macmoneagle was remote viewing, and his assignment was Mars. And normally he did defense stuff. He remote viewed Russians and whatever. But on this particular occasion, he remote viewed Mars. And what he found there was that something had been there before. And he was instructed to go backward in time to find out who or what had been there. And so what he found was, well, actually, when he got there, there was a pyramid, but was dilapidated. It, was really just gonzo. And so he was instructed to go back to when whoever built this. And so Joe Macmoneagle went back over 1 million years. All right. So first of all, let's look at what the date here. It's 1 million years ago. All right. So it's not any time in the very recent past. 1 million years ago. Well, I don't know if anybody can comprehend that, but in time, I don't think it's that long. Dinosaurs, 65 million years. So, time passes and et cetera. But 1 million years ago, he found these people, and they were very tall and very thin, and he described them as being closed in, thin covering, et cetera. So they had an advanced civilization. They were, when he found them, and now it's not clear what, I'll just tell you what it is, because I'm not clear about the time frame. He found people, these large people, and they were hibernating. They were hibernating from what Joe Macmoneagle calls the storms. And they were hibernating because they were waiting. They were waiting for something or somebody. Now, what were they waiting for? They were waiting for somebody to return and save them. Why? Now, again, before I go any farther, I want you to understand this is a military, credible guy and supported by many other people that have seen the same images. Before Viking ever arrived there, I should have pointed that out before, I guess. But these other people have seen the same images remotely, remote viewing. So these other people, credible people, have confirmed this, and that's why we are talking about it. So what happened to these people? A comet passed by the planet and ripped its atmosphere off. Ripped the atmosphere off Mars and basically forced these people to go underground and hibernate and to do whatever they're doing, and et cetera. Obviously at a very slow or stopped pace. So this is what Joe Macmoneagle found. Now, let's go on to Courtney Brown. Now, Courtney Brown, if you don't know it, he runs the Farsight Institute, and they do some fantastic, incredible stuff. Also, Courtney Brown has done remote viewing of Mars. Courtney Brown has never said there are Americans on Mars. Joe Macmoneagle never said there were Americans on Mars when they remote viewed them. So remember that, because we're going to bring that up a little bit later. The next thing I want to talk about is that there have been other people that have remote viewed Mars. And again, it's not Mars now, but it's Mars a long, long time in the past. And I will leave a link to this video in the description, but it is fascinating. It is somebody in a trance or a hypnotic state, and they're talking about they are some kind of an officer. They're married and living on Mars. And this is a long time ago in the past. And he describes himself, he describes his wife, and he describes how they live in a rural setting, but they travel by a car or an underground railway or something. And now remember going back to the Phobos probe, and it seemed like there was a lot of stuff underground. Courtney Brown, this guy, have all confirmed there are underground railways on Mars, right? There's also been, and I really don't know, I cannot remember the source completely. Well, we'll talk about this at the end, I guess. I'm just going to have to, since I can't remember the source, I'm going to have to throw this into the era of fear, or the area of theory. But that's what happened to these people on Mars. They had a civilization, and a comet came along and it ripped the atmosphere off. They had to go into hiding, etc., etc. And it has been confirmed by Joe Macmoneagle. It has been confirmed by, like the remote viewers that I've seen, they all don't confirm the same thing as Joe does, but they do confirm other things. So this is the reality of whatever this guy's talking about from Israel. He's talking about there are aliens, or are they our descendants? They're up there on Mars, and they are waiting for us to come back and save them. And they've been asleep for a long, long time. And we don't know what exactly that means, etc., etc. Now, when we talk about the story about this general, well, I hope we're starting to understand that the aliens in the general story are not sleeping. So we have to really talk about and speculate about what happened. And we're going to do that right after this very quick message. Hey, you guys, I wanted to show you. You see this t-shirt? Well, enjoy it, because it's the last time you're going to see it. You see, I finally worked out my merchandising arrangement. And so now you can get Encounters USA merchandise on Amazon. Can you believe it? On Amazon. You can get it on Redbubble, and you can get it on Teespring and TeePublic. Encounters USA, alien merchandise, or just go to encountersusa.com and check out our store. All right then, so much for the commercial. Back to the podcast. All right, now that wasn't so bad, was it? So, let's just reiterate so far what we've got. We have, and you know what? We didn't even bring into the fact that, who is it? It is Joe, the Mars guy. You know who I'm talking about, right? The guy who, and I know I'm going to remember this as soon as I turn off the record button. But anyway, Richard, I am so sorry, but has been talking about the Mars pyramids for years and years and years. He's been talking about his planetary physics and geometry, etc., etc. And so we have some very interesting and some very legitimate people. I mean, I've just came to me, Richard Hoagland. There we go. Richard Hoagland has been talking about, and Richard Hoagland is very mainstream. For years he's been talking about the pyramids on Mars. And, you know, anyway, they've done everything they can to just poo-poo it. But as we've seen, the government is, and they're not doing it intentionally. The Navy's motivations are not purely, they're not exactly good. The Navy, I think, is more interested in disclosure because they need to keep track of what these things that are in our atmosphere, because there are different species flying them. And they need to keep track of what kind of species are flying them as part of the space fleet that they were talking about. So, or the Space Force, excuse me. So that brings us to, we've got a Israeli general that says that there's life on Mars. He says that we're actually working with these people. Americans are working with these aliens on Mars. He says that we have an agreement with these people, that these people are trying to find out the fabric of the universe. I mean, hey, what could be cooler than that? But that doesn't really sync again with Joe Macmoneagle's sleeping people on Mars. So let me just throw at you some scenarios, because you know what? We really don't have the real answers to this. And the only thing I'm telling you, and the only thing I think is worth mentioning on this podcast, is what has been mentioned by more than one person, which I don't mean it's confirmation, but at least it's been kind of verified. Now, let me throw in very quickly Andrew Basiago. I tried to get a hold of Andrew for the podcast, didn't get an answer yet. I gave him like a 2-hour notice. But anyway, Andrew Basiago says him and Barack Obama went to Mars. And not sure that, so there are different extremes of people that are talking about things happening on Mars. And it would be very interesting to throw these questions at him just to see what his answers would be. Not saying that he did go to Mars or didn't go to Mars, but these are some very real questions. So we're going to go over the questions and look at the possible answers, and this will set up probably many more podcasts as we try to find people that can offer us answers to these questions. Again, I'm really looking for remote viewers that have remote viewed the solar system to come and talk to me about the history of the solar system, because I find that fascinating. Okay, so let's go over what I think happened. And just brace yourself for it, okay? It's my podcast. Now, a long time ago, and I'm not going to go that. I'm not going to go that route, but anyway. A long time ago, a million years ago, maybe more, a civilization existed on Mars. We know that because Joe Macmoneagle viewed it. The Richard Hoagland stuff, other people have remote viewed it. We are basically prefacing and saying, okay, it's legit. There was a remote civilization, or there was a civilization there a long time ago. Now, other people have confirmed that these people were very tall, 9 to 12 feet tall, very big but very thin people. And so they had, Joe Macmoneagle said that the pyramid that he remote viewed was 20,000 meters tall. That would be 20 kilometers, which would be 12 miles. 12-mile high pyramid. And so, but Joe Macmoneagle found all kinds of architecture, all kinds of things built by this advanced civilization. So we have an advanced civilization, and then we have to ask ourselves, what did they do? Did they have contact with other civilizations? Because if they were advanced the way we think that they were advanced, as we're going to talk about, then they would have been able to travel around. Now, that's going to bring up another area that we're going to be talking about eventually. And what was the extent of their reach? Because there's evidence from remote viewers like Courtney Brown that people were on the Io, the moon Io, outside of Jupiter or Saturn, whatever. So were these the same people? And who built the stuff on the moon? Were those the same people? And did they have this kind of technology? And this was all done 1 million years ago. And then the comet came along and just wiped everything out. So that brings up the question, were they the only ones, or were there other alien species that they were interacting with? And so we have to, you go down one or two roads. If there were no other alien species, that this solar system was colonized, whatever, by the people from Mars who colonized Mars and, had the comet rip off their atmosphere 1 million years ago, then who are all the other people? When did they start showing up, and what kind of interaction, if any, did they have with those people on Mars? So that's one of the many thousands of questions we can ask. But going back to Mars, what happened? Okay, so the comet comes, it rips off the atmosphere. I guess things shut down. All right, it's the big China virus on Mars. They just shut everything down, right? And suddenly, according to Joe Macmoneagle, they're forced to hibernate from these storms. And they're hibernating, and they're waiting, and they're waiting and hibernating. And so all of their infrastructure is all there, right? And it's just waiting, and they're waiting. And what are they waiting for? They're waiting for their cousins to return from the Earth. Now, return from the Earth? Well, according to Joe Macmoneagle and these people, and I'm not going to just rely on Joe Macmoneagle and those people. Remember a couple of years ago that they started saying that they had found a flash frozen civilization and these people were incredibly tall? Well, I wonder where they could have come from. So suddenly, there could be answers, and the answers are this. So let's go over the answers before we get to questions. So the answers are this. Civilization on Mars gets wiped out. Let's send somebody to Earth, make ships, make more Martians, come back here and get us, right? And take us to Earth. Didn't happen yet. So that brings up this. So that's what. So they left. They came to Earth. We found a flash frozen civilization, very tall people in Antarctica, and Courtney Brown has been down there remote viewing some alien craft that, according to his remote viewers, have been wiped out by none other than like other aliens, whatever. So we don't know who's who, really. But what we're looking for is tall humanoids that build pyramids. Well, okay, now I'm not sure that people want to really go down this road, but we also talked to people like Brian Forster down in Peru, who is studying these very large humans, these very large red-haired humans. So, did these very large red-haired humans come from someplace else a long time ago and eventually met their demise, about the end of the last ice age, or maybe even more recently? So it's there, and then we're talking about Bigfoot, right? A very tall creature. So, of course, people would have a field day, this guy's talking about Mars and Bigfoot. And so, of course, the people who write these kinds of stories, they would have a field day with that because they just don't have the level to understand anything about DNA and genetics. But what if those people came down here and said, well, we've got to continue our species, whatever. And did they continue? Because Courtney Brown and Joe Macmoneagle, I mean, I know they're not experts, but they say those people are us. Those people are us. So how did these very tall people become 6 feet, 6 feet tall? Well, maybe through genetic manipulation, and maybe some of their experiments didn't go the way they wanted, and maybe some freaks came out at night. So don't start singing that. But those are all these things that we have to really consider when we start talking about this whole thing about some Israeli general talking about Trump knowing that there is life on Mars. So that brings up, I guess it's going to be our final point. I'm really not keeping track of the time here. But I will tell you this, that it really has been a great pleasure doing Encounters USA, and I'm so excited that now I get to do this this kind of a podcast. And the only thing that I should explain this to you. I didn't ask anybody to come on the podcast because like I said, when I'm talking about the elephant, I know some guys are expert in this, and I know some are expert in that, but I just don't want to bring somebody on and then say, oh, well, do you know about this Courtney Brown thing? Or have you ever heard this remote viewing done by, and then they go, no, or they don't know about what happened in South America or Antarctica, and then they go, no, so it's very embarrassing. So this podcast, I had to do this by myself, and I probably should have said that at the beginning, but I didn't. So I apologize for that. But other podcasts, of course, we're going to be talking to other people, but I just wanted to make sure that the things that I talked about, at least I knew hopefully what I was talking about. All right, so the last thing that we need to discuss then is Joe Macmoneagle has hibernating humanoids. And then we have an Israeli general saying humanoids, no, not hibernating, that these are aliens. These are aliens. So what happened to Joe Macmoneagle's humanoids? And these aliens are not from our neighborhood, according to what this guy is saying. So the question is, and here's my idea, all right? Here's my theory. Joe Macmoneagle viewed these guys, I think in 1975, right? A year before the Mars rover Viking showed up. It was 4 years before the Phobos or those probes went out from the Russians to go out. So nobody had any really close pictures of Mars. But Joe Macmoneagle did seem to have a fairly accurate picture about what we would find there. All right, so Joe Macmoneagle's aliens were asleep, but somehow this general says the aliens there are not asleep and they're working with us, and that we're traveling back and forth. If you talked about John Lear, ex-CIA man, I mean, I know you guys that are watching this, if you watch Carrie Cassidy and these other podcasts, then you know that John Lear, and you know about these other Tompkins, all of these secret space programs that people are talking about. Well, it seems that maybe that wasn't just some kind of fabrication after all, and these guys are saying some pretty fantastic things. So, where do we go with this, or even where would we even end a podcast like this? Well, the best way to end the podcast is to really, I think it's to really look at, okay, let's say that this is all true. So we're looking at a civilization that was destroyed. All right. And the one thing that I really find amazing is that people talk about it as if it's so matter of factly. I mean, a civilization was destroyed. And it really bothers me that if this is true, that it boils down to this stupid thing about these freaky news people talking about if there's aliens or not. But again, there's enough evidence to show that there was a civilization there. And these people are very credible. They were used by the U.S. military to remote view. And the U.S. military spent millions of dollars verifying and made decisions that cost millions of dollars based on what these guys said. So they took stock in them, and I think that, and Richard Hoagland, his evidence, it's all fairly legitimate. The connection of pyramids to Earth and to Mars and things on the moon, etc. So what happened to those people? I mean, can you imagine that that a comet, did they know that they were going to be wiped out, and then it came and there was nothing to do about that? Isn't that just horrible? Isn't that the worst thing you've ever heard? That our whole world was wiped out by a comet? And people just take it in stride. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's very interesting. But then the story that these people came to Earth and these people are back there waiting for them to come, that kind of story is just amazing. And then this idea that the U.S. is up there now and it's working with aliens on Mars. That has been suggested by so many people and who have been laughed at. And now an Israeli general, the head of their satellite spy program, seems to have come out and confirmed it all. And how would he know? Well, I think we should have talked about that earlier, but I think we know that the Israelis know pretty much everything about what the U.S. is up to. So that's the way it is, and we have a lot more things to do, and we have a lot more things to investigate. But before we conclude, I want to just say to everybody, since we are at the end of the podcast, and I can kind of let my hair down a little bit, I want to wish you guys all a happy holiday. I don't know if I'll be doing any more podcasts before Christmas. We'll see how things go. I'd really like to get some remote viewers on here and to get some follow-up on this. But we'll see. I know things are hectic for you guys, and I know they've been hectic for me. I just want to say again that I do apologize for my absence. I ran for Congress in the summer of last year. I started like about April or May, and I just had to do something about what's going on now. I couldn't stand by and see what's happening and say, oh, I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to stick my head in the sand and let all this stuff happen. I just am not that kind of person. But of course I couldn't run a campaign and do all this stuff. So I'm also an author, and as you can see, I'm always plugging my books, but I do that for a reason, because I believe in them, and I believe that if people read them, they would really understand a little bit more about the world that they live in. So sure, it's a plug, but that's why I keep saying it. I wouldn't write them if I didn't want people to read them. So that's it. So it's a very interesting time, and I want to wish you guys just a very, very, very happy holiday. We will see you next time on our next podcast. And as we always say on Encounters USA, always watch your back. Merry Christmas.